on camera. Actually, maybe that's a better way of me showing up. Yes. Hello. Today is Thursday, May 2nd, 2024. Doug Zanger, editor-in-chief, founder, Indie Agency News, clearly Arsenal supporter. Getting to the end of the season. So if you're a Premier League person and you don't like what I'm wearing, well, sorry and not sorry. Thank you to our members. We are over 85 now. So we're at 86 members. Super proud of what we're building together with all of our members and with all of you. A reminder that our brief is to build a global home for independent agencies. Our mission, serve independent agencies and the brilliant people behind them. And the goal, more visibility for indies, more choice for marketers. And I've been speaking to, I will not name names, but I've been talking to marketers here and there about what we got cooking. And what they've observed or dug into a little bit is that they like the fact that they're getting to know agencies that they've not necessarily heard of before, or they might have heard of and then maybe, which is one of the big reasons that we're here. So again, that visibility piece is really, really important. And I live in a part of the world in the Pacific Northwest where, people know Wyden and Kennedy, of course. People know of some of the other agencies in Portland and in Seattle. But part of our region, Vancouver, BC, Rethink, let's give them the well-deserved shout out. But there's another part of the Pacific Northwest that people don't realize is part of the Pacific Northwest, and that's the state of Idaho. So people think, oh, Idaho, that's like Colorado. Well, yeah, but if you think about it, like Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon, I'm not trying to give you a geography and a geology seminar here, but high desert, hills, mountains, and Boise is part of that. Boise is part of the Pacific Northwest. And Drake Cooper is one of our members in Boise. Yes, along with Stoltz. So those are two really big agencies in Boise. So when you think about the market, those are two agencies that come to the top, pop to the top of the list. But also there are some other great agencies, and we'll talk a little bit about Boise here. But Steve is joining us from Drake Cooper. I had a fun time visiting last month in Boise, and we'll be back again soon. But we're going to be talking about this really interesting project that the agency did for the annual Treefort Music Fest, which happens in spring break in Idaho, and March, end of March, which is fantastic, and we'll get to that here in a second. But Steve, just give us a little snapshot of your background, how long you've been at Drake Cooper, and a little bit more about your journey.
Sure. So I've been at Drake Cooper for a little over 11 years.
Wow.
I joined in January of 2013. It's my second job out of school, actually. Before that, I worked at a design shop called Creative Soapbox here in Boise. Smaller shop, was like 3 to 5 of us, but we got to work on a lot of really interesting, different types of like design for clients, everything from, advertising to did a lot of book typesetting. I typeset a textbook for an environmental psychologist.
Okay.
It's like a really kind of cool, intro into the career. But I gravitated toward digital and interactive designer job. Came up at Drake Cooper in 2013, and I made the jump, and it's been awesome. Been there ever since.
Yeah, and let's talk about that role for a second, because again, if we look at, we pop this back up, director of UX and technology so there's a couple things here. Number one, for an agency, it's both intuitive and also something that's new-ish for the agency world. But I have to imagine as well that on the flip side, for brands and for clients to have that piece in house. And listen, the role that you have and practices and divisions and departments and agencies, they may be called something different,
Sure.
but that piece of it, and I like the specificity of the UX piece of it, because that's something that everyone struggles with. I don't, I don't care how great of a brand you are, you you will always be able to work on your UX. But I'm curious about your 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 view on the role as you've grown it over time at Drake Cooper, and why you believe it's such an important part of the agency, especially as it relates to working with brands and clients to help them grow.
Yeah. So, I think I've always kind of teetered between creative and UX, or experience design, or digital design, or technology, or whatever you want to call it. And I think what's been really interesting about that journey is finding a place to um, provide support adjacent to the creative message, right? So, like,
Mm,
the way we think about this is we've got messaging, how the brand communicates with the user. That's campaigns, that's brand, like, identity development, that's um, content, images, videos, whatever. And then experience, like, how does the user navigate the brand, right? And that could be anything from, I mean, I focus on the technology part of experience, but that can be anything from, like, wayfinding, and product, um, you know, onboarding, and things like that. Like, how are people, are people getting the message? Is the brand, presenting itself in a way that uh, is captivating and
mhm.
interesting? And then are people able to um, navigate it when they get to it? So it's kind of like, what happens after the first click, like when somebody
Right.
sees an outdoor board, like, where do they go next? What do they do? And how are we kind of mapping that all the way through the process?
Got it. Yeah, and I have to imagine that that is something that, if you're working with a client, working with a brand, they're not they're not necessarily, they may be thinking about it, but then they don't realize how much they need that.
Sure.
So I have to imagine that's one of those situations where a client says, "Oh, thank God."
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's and we have a really good, kind of, I think, process and relationship with the creative team, and the way that we approach it. I think with this holistic view is helpful in that, like, we can solve problems that are kind of like, as people move further down the funnel, using UX in ways that we maybe couldn't before,
Right.
or
Right.
would do.
Exactly. All right. So let me go over here. Let's go over to Treefort and let's take a look. So give us the background on the Treefort Music Fest and how this project is called Freakfort. So
Mhm.
you were explaining it to me, and I like the 8-bit. I like the 8-bit piece a lot. But give us a little bit of background on Treefort.
Yeah, so Treefort Music Fest is a 5-day, like, indie pop, punk, rock, hip hop festival.
Hmm.
Tons of different genres and types of music. Happens in downtown Boise. Happens late March, like you mentioned. It's sort of spread out between, there's a main stage and some other pop up stages, and then there's a ton of venues downtown. There's over 400 bands, so it's like there's just a
Yeah.
ton of bands that play this
That's the
festival.
thing. It's not like it's not small, and
No.
people don't. It's yeah.
Yeah, it's something like 20 venues, I think, somewhere in there. And then there's a bunch of adjacent forts too. So I think that they've done a really nice job branding Treefort and creating this kind of like system around it. I should also say, this is like what's on the screen here. This is not Drake Cooper. This is the
No, no,
Treefort.
no, no, no.
They do
Yep.
a great job with all that. But yeah, they've got this concept of forts, right? So there's Treefort's the hub, but then there's, Hackfort, which is all about technology and design, and there's
That's
Alefort,
really,
which is a huge beer garden, and there's Yoga
yeah.
Fort and Story Fort and Podfort for podcasts, and all sorts of stuff. Um, so yeah, kind of backing up a little bit, one thing that I think is really kind of critical to understand about Treefort is that being such a big festival and so spread out and so many bands, I think discovery is like really key to their value proposition.
Right.
Like there's there's your headlining bands, like big touring bands that come through.
Right.
But there's also just a ton of bands you've never heard of before. And there's a ton of comics that you might not have.
Is that Mark Maron?
Yeah, Mark Maron with headline comedy for us.
The Mark Maron laugh.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And
did he do 10 minutes on turmeric? That's what I remember.
I didn't actually get to go.
Yeah. He did a bit at the Comedy Store in LA. He did 10 minutes on turmeric that I loved. Nice. Not a lot of people got it, but I did. I Mark Maron, I love the turmeric bit. Bring back the turmeric bit.
But yeah, so discovery is such a key thing to this, and I think what my takeaways I go every year, and one of my key takeaways is always like looking back on the things I enjoyed the most. It was some band I'd never heard of before, and I was going to a bar to meet a friend or whatever, and they just happened to be playing. So discovery is really central. And yeah, it's an awesome thing that we have to see. So
gaming this out a little bit, and this just popped into my head. And if this does happen, I apologize to the good people of Boise. Like this feels like what South by was before it became what it is. Is that accurate? Have you been to South by?
I've never been to South by, so I can't speak from personal experience. I think
like because I love this vibe, right? Because it's because you have this music festival, but then you have all of these really interesting pieces around it.
Yeah. I've heard the comparison. I think Treefort does a really nice job of curating what they're doing. And there's a ton of really great volunteers and like kind of core folks involved with the festival.
Yeah.
They've actually there's
Arm and Hammer. Geez. Okay. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So you get some bands, you get some pretty well-known acts, and then you get a ton of locals too. That's another kind of key thing to what we're going to talk about here with Freakfort. But there's a ton of local bands that play it, and they're really great about, including local musicians, and
that's what we call a professional broadcast segue. So let's take a look at this. So walk us through Freakfort.
Yeah. So Freakfort is a web-based AR augmented reality experience that connects. It uses this idea of discovery to help promote local bands that are playing Treefort, and also help feature local artists involved in Freak Alley, which is the first part of the name Freakfort. So another thing that we have here in Boise that's pretty cool is Freak Alley. It's like an open air mural gallery.
Yeah, I was just going to say, let me go to that slide because that gives it a little bit more spatial. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a ton of murals. It's this alley that connects 8th and 9th Street. So right in the core of downtown.
Yep.
Like really central to Treefort happens like throughout downtown. So there's a lot of foot traffic happening anyway. So it's kind of a natural thing. And it's all about local art and and so we wanted to use this concept of discovery and it started from wanting to just do something with AR and explore AR a little bit. I mean, this isn't, first off, I should say, like, this is a sort of a proof of concept. It's an internal project.
Yep. Right.
So we wanted to explore and see what we could do. And it felt like such a natural fit. And, freakfort.com was available, which is always the last
that's always helpful
exercise. Yeah.
Right. Oh my gosh. So good. So let me pop. So that's what it looked like in action there.
Yeah.
I mean, and there are a lot of AR is so interesting to me still. Pokemon Go was probably the gold standard to it. But what I find interesting in this is that it's sticky. This feels sticky. And in your experience, you've probably seen AR things that feel like, well, it's okay, but they're not nearly as sticky.
I think one of the big kind of rules that we set for ourselves while we were going through this project, because like we knew we wanted to do something with AR. That's where it started. And typically you wouldn't probably start or might not be the best thing to start with the medium and try to build a message out of it. You know,
Right.
like you want to start like, what's the message? What do we want to do? And what's the best way to like, what's the best medium to convey it? But we knew we wanted to like go from zero to having like a core understanding of how AR works and web-based AR. So it's something that we could, you know, potentially do for client projects in the future.
Sure.
And one of the rules though that we set kind of for ourselves was like, it still has to be cool if AR wasn't a part of it. It still has to be like interesting.
Oh,
You
interesting.
know,
Okay.
so like
Right.
this could be, it might not be as interesting or as sticky or as engaging, but this could be a web page where it's just a big flat set of murals and you're clicking around to try to find the one that animates and then it plays a local band and gives you information about them or something. Like I think that the goal was to come up with something that would be cool in addition to AR, not because of AR, you know.
Oh, yeah. I like that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, and you got a band there. Uh, let's see. And then of course you got the alley there. Now, the thing that you told me to do. All right, there's a lot of code coming up here. Hold on. This is when we start getting a little bit nerdy because there's a really great blog post on the Drake Cooper site.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk because you said web-based AR.
Mm-hmm.
So walk us through some of the nuts and bolts.
Sure. So there's kind of two ways for like mobile device AR. There's app-based. So this is AR that happens within an app. Sometimes the app is the core, like the purpose of the AR. Sometimes AR is like a feature in the app. So an example of that might be a furniture planner, like, or a furniture catalog where you can show what the chair looks like in your living room, right? That's an AR thing. That's app-based AR. Web-based AR is just fully browser-based. So this is something that like you can go to freakfort.com. It's still live. You can go pull it up and view it. You don't need to download an app. And the benefit of that is it's obviously a lower barrier to entry, right? Getting someone to download an app for something like this might be tricky. And it's a little quicker to deploy. We don't have to, you know, go through the app store and all that stuff. So mobile device browsers have come a long way. And that's what's kind of enabled this like web-based AR capability. And then there's a few platforms that support it. So like there's some libraries that are happening behind the scenes here to do the image recognition and the like the image tracking functionality that we're building on top of. So yeah, there's the platform we ended up choosing is called Eighth Wall, which you see there in that screenshot. Eighth Wall is a it's like a cloud studio for web-based AR projects. Ton of brands use it. In fact, there's a great gallery of AR like projects on their website you can check out. And one of the really nice things about Eighth Wall is that it comes kind of pre-packaged with all the stuff that you need. So there's a code editor in there, and we're just like writing code on top of the things that they're giving us. So they handle the like we just upload a photo of the image target. So the way this works is
I see. Okay.
Here, like we're basically taking the image target, which is the actual painted mural.
Right.
And when the app launches, it automatically finds the image target, and then all the elements that we're building around it in JavaScript are just pinned to the dimensions of that target. So we can now have a 3D world, and the camera like can move around, and everything just sort of sticks to it.
Oh my gosh. This is, I mean, this I know it's not as easy as push button make thing. Let's be honest, right? But and I want to go back to the web-based piece of this too, because I was at a conference. God, I can't remember. I think it was when I was at the Dom, so it was 2017, and there was this talk of more web-enabled everything versus apps, and so I'm curious about that a little bit more, because you're right. When you are doing something web-based, it takes the time from concept to launch. It makes it a lot quicker. But so I'm curious about your thoughts on web-based versus apps, just overall, and what the best use cases would be for a brand.
Yeah, I think in general, for most marketing type executions, web-based is going to be the way to go, again, because of that lower barrier to entry. I think apps are great for brand loyalty. I mean, there you can do a lot with web, but
Right.
it's still not quite there. There's more you can do in apps, like push notifications are easier,
Sure.
stuff like that. If you have a brand that's really could be a utility, like you know, I don't know, a ski resort that people are going to check information frequently. Like
Right.
that might be a good case for an app. You got a dedicated audience. They're more likely to download it.
Right.
There is something to the visibility in the app store too. I mean, it's a new it's
Sure.
like a different kind of marketplace that people can find your
Right. Right.
products. And then like mobile games and things like that. It makes sense. So I think it's just kind of a case by case thing. It really
Sure.
depends
Sure.
on what makes the most sense for that.
Yeah, no, it is an interesting conversation to have, and you and I were talking about this and UX and technology in general, and its evolution. Definitely worth putting a pin in it, as we like to say in corporate speak, right? But we're indies, so we will eschew the corporate speak. This is really fascinating. We'll put a link to this entire project when we post this interview. Before we go, though, tell me about Boise, because here's the thing. So we've got, some of you might be seeing Boise for the first time through, through Treefort. You might be learning about this new festival that maybe next March you're going to go to Boise and hang out for a week. It's a great introduction. I've been out here in the Pacific Northwest for 32 years. Boise has changed a lot. Sure. And I'm curious because Boise is a very dynamic, creative city that people may not necessarily think of first, but man, what a market. Tell me a little bit. You've been there for a long time. Did you grow up in Idaho?
I grew up in Idaho. Yeah, I grew up
Yeah.
in on the east side of the state, and I came to
Pocatello,
Idaho Falls, actually.
Idaho Falls. Okay.
Yeah. And I came to Boise in 2004 to go to Boise State.
Okay.
Go
Great
Broncos.
school. Yep.
And yeah, it definitely has changed since it's 20 years, that I've been here. But I think that a lot of the staples are, the Record Exchange and Norell and the kind of like core indie music venues and things like that are still there. I think Treefort, in some ways, when Treefort happens, the vibe downtown changes a lot. Like you get a lot more people walking around, and you can literally hear music and pop-up stages everywhere you go. But in other ways, it's still kind of like the same people coming out. It's not like a totally different audience, really. I think there's still like Treefort has a really good mass appeal in Boise as well. And yeah, I've been involved with different creative kind of endeavors here, like AIGA Idaho and Boise AdFed, and hanging out. Like, I've got a lot of friends in the creative community. I think it's a pretty tight knit creative community and agency community. So I don't know. I don't have a basis of comparison really.
No,
but I think it's a great creative spot.
Yeah. So for those of you, I'll try to give the analogs here. It's got a little bit of a Richmond, Virginia vibe. It's got a Portland vibe. Boise tends to be more liberally minded than the rest of the state. Like a lot, Portland's the same way. Seattle is similar. The food is phenomenal. By the way, the food scene in Boise is outstanding. And yeah, it's a very walkable, clean, nice city. And then Boise State, as you mentioned, Steve, very close. Mm-hmm. And so it does have some college town vibes. It's also the state capital. So it's really the hub of a lot of things in Idaho, and certainly worth a visit, simply to visit because it's beautiful for a vacation. Going up to McCall, heading up all the way up to Coeur d'Alene. If you head out to Pocatello, which is a great Dennis Miller word. Pocatello, babe. We're going to Pocatello. I just realized. But it is a beautiful state. So if you're looking for something a little different, but feels similar, head on out to Boise for sure.
Yeah. So just sorry, a couple things. Bogus-based too, like that's actually a longtime client of ours. And so get a little plug in there. But
I love a little shameless
like
plug.
Super close to town. Great ski
it's like
area.
20 minutes, right?
It's a little, it depends on traffic, but it's like 16 miles up kind of windy.
Oh, okay, so not that close.
But I think 16. Anyway, like so the full year round, they do summer stuff up there too, so it's super cool. There's like really easy access to like river sports and things like that. A lot of great stuff.
If you like fly fishing, that's Henry Winkler. I think he goes to Idaho quite a bit.
Yep.
So God bless him. All right, Steve, this is fantastic. Again, we will put all the information about Treefort, about Drake Cooper. Maybe we'll find a few links about Boise in the post. We'll put it up next week. But Steve, thank you so much for sharing all of this insight, including the nerdy stuff, by the way. I'm glad we nerded out a little bit. But again, thank you to Drake Cooper for your support of Indie Agency News. Steve, much more to come. Why don't you go ahead and hang out backstage for a second while I say goodbye. But thanks again for joining us.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right, everybody. That was fun. I love any project that an agency does. And this is a great example. Drake Cooper doing something that's meaningful for the community, but could also be meaningful for their clients and for brands. If you have work that you've done, maybe you just launched it, get in touch with us, indieagency.news. And by the way, the thing about indie work live is it doesn't have to be new work. If you worked on something 5 years ago that was great, let's talk about it. If you did it 10 years ago, even better. We can still learn from all of the stuff we've done throughout our careers. Tomorrow, fun and games, random Q. It's where we ask somebody to pick a number between 1 and 10. We ask them a random question and we score them on the quality of their answer. Yeah, fun and games. Fridays. That's what I'm talking about. On behalf of everybody at Indie Agency News, I'm Doug Zanger. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.